I'm going to turn it over to Jeff.
Thanks.
To give his presentation.
Okay. Well, I was a victim of the what are they, the things at the airports, whatever the heck that is. You know, I was checking constantly with Delta, and I was supposed to fly out Sunday morning, and we checked even before we got on the shuttle to go there. And we get there, start walking up to the thing, and of course the woman said, "I'm so sorry, they just canceled it." So there was another couple of people who were from South Carolina, and the three of us thought, well, you know, we knew we were going to have to go. If you fly Delta, you always have to go through Atlanta. So we figured, let's book on the next one, and then we'll just all take the shuttle out here together. The first one we could get was at 6 a.m. the next morning. You had to start boarding at 5:20, and the shuttle wouldn't run from the hotel. So we ended up having to book an Uber driver for 4:15 in the morning. Thankfully, that afternoon, they canceled that flight too. So at that point, we gave up and decided to rent cars. So yesterday, I spent the whole time driving all the way from Baton Rouge to here. But luckily, it's a straight shot, and I used to teach at LSU, so I already knew the way pretty much. Another thing is that I've just before leaving for that meeting, that was the Southeastern Archaeological Conference, I just got appointed a research scholar at the Osceola Research Institute in Monticello. And the reason I'm doing this is twofold primarily. One is that I can apply for grants through them, and they have a very low overhead, which granting agencies love. And the other thing is that one of the employees there is thinking of buying my entire library. So, but there's some other reasons too, but anyway, it's no huge deal. But what I'm going to talk about today is a project that we did several years ago now. And I've got to give you a lot of background about stuff first. Oh, wait a minute. Okay. Oh, well.
There you go.
Thank you. Ah, great. As you know, the De Soto expedition landed, we think, at the south end of Tampa Bay in May of 1539, and did a whole lot of stuff after that. And but we don't really care. These are some of the types of artifacts that have been found in Florida that we know came from the expedition, just to give you some idea. But this is really not a talk about artifacts per se of that type anyway, you know. And so landing down here, coming up here, hey, that's us. And going up, there's all this other mess and everything. You know, when Soto planned his expedition and he had to pay for it himself and everything, he was going to have all these supply ships coming up periodically from Cuba and resupplying them several times. So what they had planned to do was to, you know, periodically come back down to the coast. The problem was that about the time they got up here, there was a lot of discontent among all of the people with him, and he was really worried, and I think rightly so, that if he went back down to the coast, some members of his expedition would probably mutiny and kill him, possibly. But the main thing is they'd all abandon the whole expedition and go back to Cuba. So he intentionally stayed away from the coast, which meant they couldn't get resupplied on stuff, which had a far-ranging effect. And, you know, there are two things, you know, we've all tried to plod through the accounts and everything, but there are two sites that are of some importance in this. One is at Mobila here, somewhere in western Alabama. I have the feeling they've actually discovered it, and I have the feeling we're going to hear pretty soon, we're going to see a book or something about that. They're waiting to spring this out there. They wouldn't say they were mum at this meeting, the people who are involved in that, but I think they've actually found it. But this is where Chief Tuscaloosa got all these other lower chiefs together and they made a surprise attack upon the Spaniards and really, put a hurt on them. During that, they lost a lot of stuff. And by stuff, it's not just the accoutrements and horse tack and things like that, but also gifts like beads and things that they otherwise would have been handing out. So that a lot of the stuff that we find archaeologically actually got lost right here. And then as soon as they crossed the Mississippi border near present-day Starkville, they were at Chickasaw, which is the Chickasaw Indians, in case you didn't get that connection, who are still there today. That's another one that we're so close we can smell it, that kind of a thing. We're just trying to pinpoint exactly where the actual village was, but they're finding lots of the remains that, especially of metal, that got left behind at that point. And so by this time, they're pretty depleted. At Chickasaw, there was a night attack basically, and several of the Spaniards were killed. They lost a few horses, but they lost a lot of the stuff that they were carrying with them. And then they headed on, and this is the Mississippi River right here, and that's a real easy to define part of the trip, because by far this was, it's a huge river, and it was by far the largest thing they had to negotiate. They stayed there for over a month when they got to it. And so the frustrating thing is they don't really give us any description about crossing the river. I wish they would have. Somewhere out there, there's probably in a notarial archive in Spain, there's probably an account that some survivor wrote in a court deposition or something about what they went through there. Those of us today, when you go down there and you sit there and look at the bridge at Memphis or whatever, and you just say, how? You can't imagine it. But anyway, they got across, and with the pigs and with the horses, But anyway, they crossed over, and then they do a whole bunch of stuff over here, and then eventually De Soto dies at Wachoya in southeast Arkansas. His body's weighted down in the river. There's no burial place of De Soto. And the other guys, rightly so, said, the heck with this, let's go to Mexico. And they tried to go overland, get down here, and realize, not a good idea. This is desert, no water. They have to go back, and they melted down all of the metal they had left to make nails and things. They built a bunch of raft or boat-like affairs or whatever, and some of these are transporting horses. I think that what they said is they'd put the front feet in one sort of canoe and the back feet in the other and lash them together, and they made it. And they're being harassed by Indians the whole way too. And they come down here, and they amazingly get back to Mexico, where there's astounded people down there who could not believe, because everybody had written them off years ago and thought they were completely massacred or whatever. So that's the story in a nutshell. What we're concerned about is up here after they crossed the river. There's a town that's mentioned in all four of the accounts that we have that's called Casqui, Casqui. Well, that's the battle at Chickasaw. It doesn't matter. It's, but it's up here not long after they crossed the river. And it was one of the few places where they were met with open arms, which was kind of weird. We think that it's because they had, at that time, they'd been suffering through some drought for several years, and that's also reflected in different types of data. So I think, they saw these weird creatures coming with hairy faces like dogs, and some of them are on these bizarre animals. In fact, some of the early accounts say that when they first saw mounted Spaniards, they thought they were like centaurs, or whatever. But you can imagine it was pretty weird. But Chief Casqui, that was his, the Spaniards would name the chief, the town, and the province all after the chief's name. It's just the way they did things. But the chief, Casqui, actually brought out a greeting party bearing gifts of food and skins and things like that. By this time, the expedition looked pretty grubby. You know, all the, including the artwork, which you'll see later on, is probably not exactly what it was like at the time. They were pretty much wearing buckskins by the time they got out there. Okay. Oh, now I was employed by the Arkansas Archaeological Survey, which is a part of the University of Arkansas. We were our place in the hierarchy of things was like another university campus almost. We had 11 stations around the state, most of which had certain counties that they were in charge of. And then there were two of us that were state parks. One was Toltec, which is now called Plum Bayou. They finally got rid of the ridiculous name of Toltec, which somebody came up with like in the 1800s or something. And the other was me at Parkin. They'd known about the site at Parkin for a long time, and you'll see in a second why it's important. And the dream of Hester Davis and also Charles McGimsey was to create a state park at Parkin and to have a full-time research program there. After I had finished my PhD in 1989, this is so bizarre. Very first thing I did after finishing my PhD was I came here to Tallahassee because my wife was living here. And Tony Paredes, the chair of the anthro department at that time, allowed me to get a small project out here at, we called it the Goodwood Project. It wasn't actually on this property, but it was over on what is now some of these part of the big complex with all the hospital and stuff. And that was the first thing I did, was the Goodwood Project, as I called it. At that time, I had no idea what this place was like. But anyway, that's neither here nor there. But anyway, I went for a year then. First job I got, archaeology type or academic type thing, was a one-year position at LSU in Baton Rouge, probably the worst year of my life. And it was just a one-year position, a temporary thing. And while I was there, Charles Ewan, who many of you know, was working for the survey at that time. And he wrote me or whatever and said, hey, you know, they're creating this new station at Parkin up here. You should apply for that. Because I knew about Parkin because there had been a Spanish bead found there before, which we'll see in a minute. So he sent me the flyer, and I can't find this now, and it kills me. And while Hester was alive, I had her search everything, and she couldn't find it. But it was advertised as opportunity of a lifetime. And if I ever write a memoir, that's what the title of it's going to be. But anyway, I applied for it, and I was, you know, I was shortlisted and everything else, and I ultimately got it. And when I got there, it was parts of the site were still privately owned and stuff, and the state was really having difficulty with title problems because a lot of these people were elderly and uneducated and such. And the sad thing is that a lot of them had thought that they were paying off to buy the property, and it turned out they weren't. They were just paying somebody who was basically collecting it like rent. But the organization that Marie mentioned, the Archaeological Conservancy, the president at that time, Mark Michael, took a special interest in this site. And he actually, because the state park people were kind of ham-handed about trying to deal with this stuff, Mark was really good about it. He had a very smooth voice and such, and he wasn't a government man also. That made a huge difference. And he would go out and actually talk to these people and explain everything, and he would get them have appraisals done that were, you know, above board and everything. And so he slowly bought up all the little pieces that needed to be bought up. That's how I sort of got to know him, and it was years later that he invited me to be on the board, which I still am, by the way. But that's another story. So anyway, here's where we're talking about. Up here in the northeast part of the state, Parkin's as the crow flies, about 32 miles from Memphis, Tennessee. It's definitely in the Mississippi Delta. You know, if you think of like the old black blues player out in the cotton field, that's what it's like. And in fact, Parkin has a lot of claims to fame that I'll briefly tell you about. Number one is De Soto was there, visited there. So, and we used to have these great pins and also bumper stickers that said, I heart Parkin, De Soto did too. but you know, then in the, let's see, in the 1960s, the author John Grisham went to elementary school there for a few years because his dad was a levee worker in the area at that time. There's also, the whole area is very famous for blues music. And B.B. King fathered several illegitimate children in Parkin. And the juke joint that burnt down where he named his guitar Lucille is about 10 miles as the crow flies from Parkin. And also Howlin' Wolf worked at a plantation in the area and lived in Parkin, and also Sonny Boy Williamson, who was one of the two founders of the King Biscuit Flower Hour. If you're not a blues fan, you won't understand some of that. But anyway, but the most bizarre thing, and I love this, I was out there on the site one day, and one of the local women brought up somebody with her and introduced me to her. And the woman was like a writer, and she had written a story about some of the prisoner of war camps they had around there in World War II. You know, they had a lot of Italian and also German guys from Northern Africa out there, and I don't know if it was legal, but they employed a lot of them on the farms around there. I mean, these guys couldn't very well run away because of their accents. There's no way, you know. But this woman had written a sort of fictionalized story about this called The Summer of My German Soldier. And it was actually made into a TV movie in the 1960s with Christy McNichol was the main female star. But this is the bizarre thing, just too weird, is my cousin Richard Mitchem had a bit part in that. He was the gas station attendant who called the cops on him or whatever. So just totally blew me away when I found that out. So how could I not keep working there, you know? But anyway, okay now. Well, let's see. Let me just see if I must have accidentally turned it off. I'm sorry. Parkin was sort of the capital of a province, we think, during the Mississippian times. The reason is because it's the largest of these sites by far up and down these rivers, the St. Francis and the Tyronza River. And this is actually it right here. It's right at the confluence of these two rivers, a very sort of strategic place. And some of these outliers may not be part of it, but we think that this is like a single polity right here. And we know from the Soto accounts that there were all these chiefs, these petty chiefs, were at war with one another around there. There was no reason to have war because the environment could easily support as many people as you wanted, but this is probably just egos and stuff. So anyway, these sites are, you have to be real careful about trying to propose something like this, but I can't go into the details now, but there's some real similarities in a lot of different material culture and other stuff that really tie these together. And there's other areas around that, oh, I thought I had a slide in there, but I guess I don't, but that sort of shows some of the neighboring polities. But the site itself is roughly rectangular. This drawing is done like at an angle. 17 acres, and it's surrounded by a ditch or moat. I mean, I hesitate to just call it a moat because it's it's not always filled with water, but I'm sure that during the high times, high river water level times in the river, it probably was. The main entrances, which we've identified archaeologically, are at the corners up here. You know, so and the layout of the houses and stuff is just pure conjecture, really. And I don't think there was a plaza out there because the town was so crowded. I don't think they had the luxury of that. They had to live in fortified villages because they're all at war with one another at this time. And that was made very clear in all the Spanish things as well. There's a platform mound right along the river that was the platform for the chief's house. And then it has like an apron, I guess you could call it, or a smaller mound attached to it. And some of Casqui's wives and other important people lived right there. The other people are spread out in here. And I can say that the archaeology we did shows the sites was occupied for at least 500 years continuously. So in some places, the deposits are as much as 2 meters thick. It's like nothing you would ever see in Florida. And it's so drastically different, real dark clayey soil. So, and it's really hard to see features and things. So it was a very good way to train students. So I taught a whole bunch of field schools there. Oh, this is the thing. Yeah, we sort of have the Parkin phase here. His arch enemy was the people up here that we call the Nodina phase, which was a much larger group, and they're right along the Mississippi. And then there's these others down here, et cetera, et cetera. But C.B. Moore went there, of course. In 1910, he spent one day at Parkin, and he talks about it. He says that even at that time, it was very well known, and any pot hunters working in the area, their day wasn't done until they'd stopped and done a little digging at Parkin, you know. And he was kind of disappointed in it, though, because he had just come downriver from Neely's Ferry, where he got something like 547, I think it was, effigy vessels digging up there, and they only got about 25 vessels. I think they dug 19 burials or something. So he didn't think it was worth digging there anymore. So they went on, and you know, but and there's his gopher. You know about that. I want to show you some of the pottery, though. This is why we've had, why there's such a terrible problem with pot hunting in Arkansas, is because of the truly spectacular stuff that they made there in terms of pottery. This thing went on sale the week I started at Parkin, and we don't know where it is now. I actually got a letter at one point from a guy whose father actually dug this up under the floor of one of the houses there. You know, early on when there were people living out on the site, sometimes different collectors and stuff would go up and pay them if they would let them remove part of their floor and go in there and dig under the floor where it hopefully hadn't been disturbed before. And they did that and got this from one of the burials. It very probably had like a spout coming up from here originally, but this is sort of what's sometimes called a cat monster. Actually, we now think they may be otters, actually, that they're showing. Otters can be really nasty if you get up close to them in the water. You don't ever want to think, oh, what a cute little animal, because they'll rip you to shreds. Frogs, they love frogs. And I think it's because frogs spend part of their time outside and part underwater. And also they start out life in a very different form than they are later on. But beautiful work. I mean, you know, really detailed and everything. And head pots. Parkin is especially well known for these. These things just, I can't, you know, they're so sought after. There's only 168 that are known. They all come from Northeast Arkansas. There's maybe 2 or 3 from across the river in Tennessee, and there's some from the Boot Heel of Missouri, and that's it. That's the only place these things show up. These are from Parkin. All the ones I show you are from that I will show you. I'm sorry?
When would these have been?
I'm about to tell you. This one is fairly small, but it has this what is either red painting or tattooing on the face, multiple piercings in the ears. We see that over and over again. This one is whole. This one, at the time this picture was taken, had been somewhat reconstructed, especially this part up here. But again, it has holes, perforations in the ears. In all these cases, the lips are slightly drawn back from the teeth, and usually the eyes are closed, which probably represents somebody who's dead. We think the best guess is that these may represent trophy heads. In other words, you go out and you kill somebody in battle, and you cut the head off, and you take it back to the village and give it to the skilled potters, and that person makes a very realistic effigy of it, which would take a while, and then you've got this thing. Now there's some issues with that though. In all but maybe one or two cases, only one of these is ever found and they're always with burials, always. Also, there have been a handful that have been found with kids too. So who knows? Yeah. No, they're not death masks, and there's a good reason, because it takes a long time to model this thing, first of all, and also from ones that are broken, we can see that the ears are done separately and then added to it. And this painting, as it looks like, that's actually slipping, which means you have to have the first step of it done. The slip is a real thick slurry of clay that fires this color. It's actually, most of the stuff that fires red is actually gray when you mix it up though. But you would have to let this part completely dry first. You would have to slip this whole part. Then the face actually on this one has almost a whitish slip on it as well. That all has to be done separately. And sometimes you have to let it dry for like a week or so. So if you're trying to make a death mask and bury it with somebody, things are not going to be good by the time you have a finished pot, This one is, at the time I photographed it in the Field Museum in Chicago, I think the Quapaw tribe has repatriated, has reclaimed this. By the way, all the stuff there, we deal with the Quapaw tribe of Oklahoma, who are primarily now known as a Plains tribe, but they may or may not have been the descendants of the people who lived here. Don't go there. Anyway, we were able to deal with them fairly well after butting heads for a long time. And they own all of these things I'm showing you, and all these head pots, except maybe this one, well, the ones I've shown you so far, we actually have on display at the park, but the Quapaw tribe owns them. Their view, unlike some that we know of, is that they want people to see the kinds of artwork that their people made and such. And the burial person that we dealt with, she early on had a couple of young sons, and she said, when my kids get older, I want to be able to show them the types of stuff that their ancestors made. So we have a very good relationship with them. Also, all the NAGPRA stuff, we tried to be as proactive as possible. So it's quite different from some other places. But this guy has what are either incisions or tattooing across the face with these lines, and then all these punctations around the mouth down there. Pretty interesting stuff. And then the rest of the head is pretty much covered with a red slip. We think these all represent males, but we aren't 100% sure. It's because so many of them were found, excuse me, weather's getting to me. So many of these things were found with burials. People in a lot of cases didn't pay any attention to the burial as to whether it was male or female, etc. So there's a lot we don't know. There's a book about these things, though. There was a Dr. Jim Cherry who who did that, and he spent years going around and visiting the people who own these and taking multiple photographs of them. So we have fabulous records about him, and he recorded all like lists of who owned the thing and who sold it to different people through the years. But this one is probably one of the most fantastic ones ever. When I'd been at Parkin for probably 10 years or so, this one sold on the market for $75,000 at that time. That would be a drop in the bucket now. It would go for millions if you could get it, I'm sure. And but this one, when it was fired, it was in perfect shape. This damage to the ear over here happened during firing. It was probably where it either spalled or something. There's a little bit of spalling right there and a little bit of a nick up here I'm not sure about. But this guy, it's hard to see in the slide, that it's a bit faded, but there's a black line that comes right down here. There are black lines going out from the end of either eye, and you really can't see these on here, but there's additional black lines doing like that. Again, lips drawn back from the teeth. The eyes on here may be open, you can't tell. And this is the back of it. And this is what I wanted to really point out about these. In every one of these cases, there's a scalp lock that's showing. That's why we think they're males. The head is completely shaved except for this wonderful scalp. And everything else tends to be shaved and then painted red. They probably didn't have their heads painted red all the time, but when they went into war, they probably did. And you can imagine it would be kind of an intimidating sight. But what this is a scalp lock, which means you basically shave everything off except for a little roundish thing up at the top of the head. And then this part here is like a little ponytail sort of thing. And what they're doing is they're making a perfect scalp. Really nice, and you make it as nice looking as you can, and it's a way to taunt your enemy. Say, come take this if you're man enough, that kind of stuff. But it's one of the things that they did. And yeah, well, those of you who do any kind of flint knapping and stuff, how sharp those things can be. And I bet there are a lot of nicks on there too. Maybe some of this wasn't paint. You never know. But this one was the very first burial we excavated in 1991. It had this guy with it. And I'll never forget, I had 4 field crews out there testing different parts of the site because we were trying to get some baseline information. And I'll never forget, my assistant for that area came up and he said, I know you're going to think I'm crazy, but I think this pot has an ear on it over here. Well, that got my attention, and sure enough, I can't show you the thing in place. We can't show skeletal stuff or whatever, but it was right at the right shoulder of a male in his 20s, perfect health, no indication of wounds or anything else at the time of death. He also had just an open bowl at the other shoulder. Again, multiple piercings in the ears. We think that what they were probably doing is, we never find anything by the ears, or very rarely. Every now and then there'll be one of those shell pen sort of things, but that's pretty rare. And we think what they're probably doing, from other records and artwork that we've seen, is probably getting feathers or something like that won't preserve, and tying those with sinew and maybe having them hanging from the ears. But again, always the multiple piercings, and not just in the lobe, up in the cartilage part. There's also a lot of times this little thingy up here, I don't know what you would call it, like a bump, and it has a hole through it. I think this must be for some kind of like, what do you call the beads? Beaded forelock. Yeah, beaded forelock or something. Though you would expect that to be shell beads. And again, we don't find beads up there. I don't know. And
Jim, what size are these?
all except for that little one, the first one that got asked about. That one was only about this tall. The other ones are usually like this one, almost life size, almost. Let's see. Again, kind of hard to see. His lips are slightly drawn back. The reason this looks so terrible is because I wanted to clean this thing up, but when I started washing it, the red slip started coming off. So I just left it. You know, we didn't want to take a chance. But all these are on display at Parkin, except for the real fancy one. That one's owned by the New York State Historical Association. And at least it's preserved, but we tried to even get them to loan it to us once, and they just flatly said no. So what can you do? Again, scalp lock on here. Again, this one has like a hole up here, so maybe they actually had some real hair hanging from the back of the head. Though I don't know, you would want that in the front, but who knows? And we've, you know, we just for the heck of it, we had an artist reconstruction done of what this guy may have looked like, and it was that. I have to be careful about the groups I show that to, but isn't it uncanny? I mean, it really is. But I always tell people it may not be the fanciest head pot ever, but by golly, it's the best documented, you know. And I thought I was going to be tarred and feathered by a torch-bearing mob of archaeologists, because there be people who've been searching their whole careers out there for one of these, and the very first burial we hit out there had this thing with it. So anyway, and then again, this is a copper spider gorget that unfortunately was dug up by a kid out there back in the 1960s. It's not perfectly anatomically correct, you know, it only has two eyes up there, but it's pretty cool looking. That's the actual thing now. It's actually owned by it may be owned by an individual, but it's on display in the Atkins Nelson Museum of Art in Kansas City. You know, this is one of those things. What was that? Yes. And I would love to be able to take some time and really examine it, because there's very likely some pseudomorphs and stuff on the back of cloth or things like that. The problem is I'm not sure how well it's been taken care of, or the opposite through the years. But it's pretty cool anyway. And one of the things we found out there was a piece of shell with an unfinished spider design on it. And this thing, I should have put a picture of this in, but that's not the subject. See, I'm not even to the subject when I'm supposed to be talking about yet. But this thing, you could tell where they were engraving the spider in, and then the end of it broke off. The end of the shell did, and you can imagine they probably just threw it out there. So anyway, I'll move ahead. Now, we do have evidence, archaeological evidence of Spanish contact at Parkin, very incontrovertible. We have a faceted chevron bead, 7 layers. This picture was actually by Dan Seinfeld, who some of y'all may remember. He actually did a really neat study of some of the glass, but that's for a different thing. That's shot on the end of it. This thing is the size of a Lesueur pea or whatever. It's teeny tiny. They found this in 1966 when Bob McGimsey had a field school out there, and oh, this pains me to say it, they for some reason had a road grader go out and scrape off the big clear area out there. I don't know why, and this was in some of the dirt they scraped up, you know. But the one thing about it is there's no doubt at all that came from the Soto expedition. That is early 16th century. It's not later. It's not French. It's not anything else. And a pot hunter in the 1960s dug up from the neck of a child burial, had this Clarksdale bell on it. This bell is actually owned by the Museum of the Red River in Idabel, Oklahoma. And when they found it, there was cordage attached to the attachment loop up there that was preserved. Also inside, and this is cool, the little iron clapper that you usually get that's almost like a ball bearing in there had gotten lost, and the Indians had put a shell bead in there, which is just too cool. But guess what? This wonderful museum lost the cordage and the shell bead. So we've had this on long-term loan, and I think at some point we're going to try and see, hey, you think you'd just maybe give us that thing or something? I don't know. Not my problem anymore, but it's still there now. Now, since we started our excavations, though, we found 2 lead shot, one of which is undamaged except for rodent gnawing, which makes it look like a little planet with meteor craters in it or something. It's very bizarre. And this was from a really nice closed context, a little trash pit associated with a house that dated from the right time period. And then we got this one that looks like it might have been chewed on or something. It was unfortunately up in the plow zone, but I'll talk some more about it in a second. This is a fragment of a Clarksdale bell that we found out there again in the plow zone. This thing came from a trash pit that collapsed during a rainstorm, you know, and those of you who do field archaeology know what this is like. You know, at the end of a day, we had this nice trash pit that we had taken everything out of one side, and we were drawing the profile of it, covered it up very nicely, and it just poured that night. Absolutely. You come out the next day and it had collapsed. So all we could do was gather up all this stuff and screen it, and this showed up in it. So we don't know if it was really in that hole or not. It's bronze, though. I don't think it's a bell fragment. I used to say that it was, but I don't think so now. The other thing I'll say about this is I'm just getting ready to send off for publication now. These things, we had the lead isotopes identified in them, and they are either from the Iberian Peninsula or Mexico, which means we're talking about Soto. The other thing that you find around there's a whole bunch of other lead shot that people were claiming could be from that. We tested those, and they're all Missouri galena, which is galena is a lead ore that you melt down, you know, and that's what the settlers were doing. But these aren't. These are probably De Soto expedition things. So, okay, now this painting was done for a book in 1995 that was published by Reader's Digest Books. It's a big coffee table thing called Through Indian Eyes. And I won't give you the whole background, but the artist, his name, T. Tom Hall was his name. Very, very gifted. I never actually met him face to face, but I corresponded with him a lot via phone and email and such. He did a really good job of this because when you get up on top of the mound, if you cut down a bunch of the trees now that are along the river, the aspect of it is almost perfect. You know, if the river level was high and everything. The accounts say the chief's house was atop the mound. There are bison skulls up here, which they also mentioned. They said, you know, the accounts kind of oddly mentioned, oh yes, sometimes they have heads of bulls above the doors or on the crests of their houses like we have in Spain. Well, they're bisons. And, you know, there weren't the huge stampeding masses or whatever, but there were smaller groups of bison around these river valleys over there. And we did find bison remains at Parkin. They're not a huge number of them, but they're out there. There's some things I would change about this now. Number one, these guys are way too nice looking. They wouldn't have any of this. They probably still would have their helmets and certainly their halberds. And Ann Early, one of my colleagues for a long time, complained that the only women shown in there were at the feet of all the men. But anyway, but the accounts, all four of the De Soto accounts, very carefully mention the building and raising of this cross atop the mound there. And the main story behind it all is that they had been suffering from a drought for a long time. And so the way these things are written, they think that maybe these odd beings that have shown up with light skin and hairy faces like dogs and stuff like that, and weird animals with them, may have come from heaven. And they asked for some help. Well, this is during the Spanish Inquisition. These are good Catholics, and they had at least a dozen priests with them on the expedition. So they, of course, and they're going through about probably 20 or 30 interpreters at this time too. So Soto basically tried to explain to him, sent out one of their carpenters with a bunch of the Indians. They went and found the longest or the tallest and straightest tree they could and cut it down, dragged it back, and they built a big wooden cross and brought it up and put it into the ground on the mound up there. And then the priest said a mass. And can you imagine what's coming out the other end to the Indians if they're trying to translate that? But anyway, and then all the Spaniards supposedly went up and knelt and kissed the cross, and of course the Indians did too. But believe me, nobody was converted during this. So that's what this is showing, though, is raising this thing. Now, with that being known, this is the earliest photograph we have of the mound out there. The river's out in the background over here. There used to be a road that ran right in front of the mound. There was a sawmill just off the site, and the mill workers lived on the site. And that's what this stuff is out here. They also sometimes stored wood out, sawing wood out there. Their main product was wheelbarrows that they were making out of cypress. And we can't do geophysical stuff that uses metal like a magnetometer or gradiometer because there's so much metal out there, it just flies off the end of the scale if we try and do any of it. And just to get an idea, there's a person standing right there just to give you an idea of the size. This is the north end of the mound, so the sort of apron part is on the opposite side of it. Again, this site, as C.B. Moore said, was so well known among pot hunters or just archaeology aficionados, whatever, that it had been really dug into a lot over the centuries. In the 1960s, Charles McGimsey, who was the founder of the Arkansas Archaeological Survey and also the creator of public archaeology, he and Hester Davis, who was his sort of assistant or whatever, they were really enamored with the Parkin site, and they really wanted to see about the possibility of turning it into a state park and having continuous research there. Well, at that time, this picture was 1965. They actually brought a bunch of members of the Arkansas Archaeological Society out there, a group like the FAS here, and they did some test pits because they wanted to see, was there still enough intact deposits to warrant this? Some people were saying, well, it's been so dug into, it wouldn't be worth it. Well, they got out there and they actually found that there was a lot of undisturbed stuff. As I said, the deposits in some places are 2 meters thick, so it's just incredible. And you can see all these things out here. These are some of the people who lived out there. And as you can see, they aren't exactly the most affluent people around. It was called Sawdust Hill at that time. When the sawmill ran, they would collect the sawdust in a big wagon, and they would go around and they would dump that into these low areas. Well, the great thing is these low areas were the old ditch or moat. So when we excavated in that, we could see right where the sawmill starts, because it was like compost all of a sudden with nails and stuff in it. And below that, it was all pre-contact. Just great stuff. I mean, it's a really wonderful place to work. That's Bob McGimsey there. I love these pants here. But anyway, this is the 1960s. This guy here was the local senator who retired just before I started, and he was the one who pushed through a bill in the state legislature to fund the creation of the state park and the research station. And again, you can sort of see that we had some issues with buildings out there and all that stuff. This is a schematic of it. You know, here again is the ceremonial mound. There are other smaller mounds that were up in this area too, but that's all a different thing. That's Hester Davis's car in 1966, right next to the mound. Somewhere I have a slide of this, but I can't find it. But there was a pot hunter's pit right up here in the top of the mound. You know, in 65, they'd had that society dig. The next year, they brought a field school over. That was the year they found the bead out there. And there was a treasure hunter's pit up on top of the mound. And they said, before we go, let's clean off the sides of that and fill it back in just so it doesn't erode or anything. So they sent some people up. Years ago, I talked to one of the fellows who had actually done that. But they started doing this, and in the bottom of this pit, they found the remains of this great big wooden post, and they chuckled and said, oh, maybe this is De Soto's cross. They took a few samples of it, wrapped it up, got sent back across the state to Fayetteville, and then they filled the thing back in. And there those samples sat until 1992, when I decided to go over and look at all the stuff that had been dug up in the 60s. And lo and behold, I came across all these packets that had never been opened. You know, they were still wrapped in the original stuff that they had collected. When I opened it up, it was wood that looked like you could have just chopped it yesterday. I mean, you know, and I said, I've got to do something with this. So I got a small grant from the Arkansas Archaeological Society, and it paid to do three things. One was to identify the species of wood, which was bald cypress. Lee Newsom identified that, who I trust implicitly. The next thing I did was I got a radiocarbon date off of it, which came out to this. When calibrated at the 1 sigma level, 1515 to 1663. Well, that's in the ballpark. They were there in 1541. And the third thing was a little bit more of a long shot, but I thought I'd like to see if we can get a tree ring date off this stuff. Well, it just so happens that there's a fellow at the University of Arkansas named David Staley, who is a world-renowned tree ring specialist, and his specialty is bald cypress, of all things. So it's like, and he's a great guy too. So I contacted him and I said, would you take a look at this? And he said, sure, you know, send it. So I sent all of it over there, and I got a message back from him saying, well, I have to have at least 100, preferably 200 rings in unbroken sequence before I can really get anything that would be statistically valid or whatever. But he did say, and these are two broken up, but he said, if you can get me a better sample, I can very probably give you a pretty solid date off this stuff. So that immediately became one of my dreams, was to do that. Well, first though, I had to do all this other stuff out on the site. In the meantime, we did a lot of geophysical and such up on the mound. And the other thing was that when they did all this stuff in the 1960s, they very carefully mapped stuff in on their maps and everything. You know, the Arkansas Archaeological Society, again, is a statewide society, but the survey works with them very closely. And we have one of these projects every year somewhere, and we train people how to do stuff. So what we had done, and I thank them in my prayers or whatever so much, they had put a benchmark in right off the mound when they did this stuff, which was great because it meant we didn't have to go from like a half mile away or something. And we were able to pinpoint right where their point of where this stuff was, which is this light blue dot here. And then our geophysical guy, we thought, oh, there's going to be all kinds of stuff. Almost nothing showed up in there. It was the weirdest thing. We thought there would be a structure and maybe some buried chiefs or something up there, but there was really almost nothing else. but we don't know how much disturbance had been done in the past. Well, he swore that the anomaly he got was about a meter over from that here. And he was all smug and everything. And he thought, oh, yeah, when we get down there, he'll see how bad those guys were. Well, when we actually dug in there, it was precisely where that was. And there was nothing here, which I thought was great vindication of the quote amateurs or avocationals or whatever. But we had to, and at this point, the first thing I tried to do, or during the intervening years after first studying this stuff, was I tried to find funding to fund this project. And, you know, funding agencies suck. They really do. They just, I don't know what it is. They want it, unless it's like big in the searchlights and is going to be on the cover of Science or something. They just don't want to do it. But finally, Mark Michael came to me. He said, I deal with this foundation in New York that was founded by a woman who was an archaeologist during life, and she had set aside an endowment to fund different archaeological things. And so they invited me to write a proposal, which I did. And the only time ever, they gave me a lot more money than I asked for, which was really weird. In fact, we had to return some to them, which just, the people at the university were completely freaked out because they'd never had to do that before. But anyway, I acknowledge their support because they allowed us to do this. I put together a crack team. That's me, of course. This is the guy who's now the station archaeologist out there. These two guys are from our sponsored research area. We made them do a lot of the digging. This is our geophysical guy. This was one of the station assistants, and she's real good at record keeping and such. That's my longtime assistant, and that was my boss. So that's who all those people are. I know it's mainly male, and that just happened to be by chance. I didn't choose it that way. It went fairly. Oh, the other thing we did was we kept this real hush hush, because I expected, if we let the news out, first of all, we'd have all these Yahoo reporters coming and stuff, and they would be misreporting everything. And then we'd get some drunk rednecks out there at night who would screw everything up. So we decided to keep it pretty quiet. And we also even had a couple of park rangers who stayed in a little trailer at the bottom of the thing at night to sort of watch things. And in some ways it was easy because we knew everything above this was all fill. And so we didn't have to worry about anything in that. So we just basically shoveled that stuff out without really even recording it. And we screened it all just to get anything that was in there. And there wasn't anything of consequence in there. And eventually we got down to this. And there's this sort of white or ashy looking stuff in there that we got. And when you read back though in the notes, what those people told me was that 50 years ago is when they did this, when they dug down to this. After they took the samples, before they started filling it back in, they laid down white visqueen on top of it. That's what white visqueen looks after 50 years in the ground. So we knew we were in the right place then. And we dug down around it. There was a portion of the thing that was still intact. And it was very weird because the top of it looked burnt, but down in there, again, it was just like wood like this floor. I mean, it looked like it was brand new. You always hear about cypress wood, how great it is. This really convinced me. I mean, if this stuff would have been whole, you could have used it for something, And when we were tearing down old buildings out there, they would sometimes have people come and salvage cypress wood from these houses because they could still use it. So we got down a ways. Well, I thought that there was, hold on, let me just see. Yeah, I need to get a different one with it. Jessica Crawford, my conservancy colleague, put this dotted thing in there. But this is me doing I'm a little teapot thing, standing there. but this is where the post hole was for this thing. And it's interesting. It didn't, I thought it would have to go halfway down through the mound, but it didn't really go that far. It went about maybe this far or so. But again, the ground surface has changed somewhat. And the thing was almost fit completely in there. But they must have had some little guy doing this. I don't know what the heck. Only one person could have dug in it, and he would have had to go like this. Then he'd have to get on that side and go like that. So anyway, this hole went down a ways. It cut through a pre-existing thing, which I'll talk about in a second, that was already there. And we eventually got down in there. Let me see. Well, you can see part of the thing here. I need to add some more slides next time I give this, but David Staley was supposed to come over and collect a sample, and then he couldn't at the last minute. So my assistant and I had to do it, and he gave us all these instructions. It's a real headache. You have to get cotton, whatever it's called when it's all flat, I don't know, and wrap that around it. And you have to put an old sheet. We got these things with little duck things on it or whatever, and wrap that, and you have to tie it with string and everything. And then this is me cutting the bottom of this pedestal thing and hoping and praying that I'm not going to cut through wood down there, because there's no way to see this, and my assistant's holding it steady, and we managed to get it out, put it into a box. And then I drove over to Fayetteville across the state where the University of Arkansas is, praying. Every time I had to go over a railroad track, I was real worried. Eventually got there, and that's David Staley doing his thing. He likes to work in sort of odd conditions, but anyway. And he's sort of starting to clean it off. But let me go back 1 second. This thing right here, at first we didn't know what it was, and we had to concentrate on the main thing. When we dug this down, though, it was an old post that had been burnt down into the ground. And I'll come back to that in just a second, though. And this is what this stuff looked like up close. You can see some of it's charred wood. Looks just like something you would find like in a campfire or something today. And it's a little hard to see on here, but there's other wood back here that's just fine. And so he started doing his thing. He actually does all this counting and stuff by hand, which I don't think there'd be any other way to do it, really. It wouldn't be a job I'd want to do. But anyway, he started doing that, and you can see there's bits of the old Visqueen and stuff on there. And the other thing, that grant had given me money for all these AMS radiocarbon dates. So I took samples that were individual rings, which was just too cool. I've never been able to do that before. And here's what those dates came out to, unfortunately, because it's so close to modern. They were between 1443 and 1650. Now, let me go back for 1 second. We do think that this is, ultimately, David said he could not get the required number of rings in place. But what they do, the way they do this is, they take all these numbers and they feed them into a computer, and they have records of tree rings for bald cypress going back something like 20,000 years up there, because they found some preserved trees basically in Missouri that had been sunk when one of the New Madrid things happened. And they were able to get a continuous thing of rings going back tens of thousands of years. But what you're looking for is the sequence of measurements. And so they feed that in. That's why they need so many in an unbroken sequence. But he couldn't get any hits from that. So he said, on the off chance, I don't think it's a possibility now. He said on the off chance, if we could ever find, a better unbroken and undamaged piece of it, we might be able to do something. the really sad thing to me is that very probably in the 1960s, when they collected those samples of wood, they probably took the outer rings off this thing. You know, what can you do? But I will say what I've done is save everything, every possible thing on this stuff, wrapped it up very carefully. It's in a steel cabinet that's kept locked. Maybe before I'm in my grave, they might have the technology where somebody can actually do something with this and pinpoint some of this stuff. This thing, I think, is probably an earlier post that was set up there. And I'm sure Guy is familiar with this. A lot of times on Mississippian sites, they would set up posts up on top of a mound for either for some kind of religious things or more often as a striking post, where, you know, it was this ritual where you'd go up, if you were like a warrior or something, you'd go up and you'd hit this with a club or something, and the whole time you'd be spouting out all of your accomplishments, you know, through time. And those had a religious significance to them. And it may be, after Soto had explained the religious significance of the cross and everything, maybe they thought, well, let's just, you know, burn the old post or pull it up, and maybe that's what was left in there, and put up another one. You know, we can still use it as a striking post, but maybe it'll be more juju or something, you know. And that may be why that thing was there in that specific place. Oh. So anyway, that's my story, and I'll be happy to answer questions. Sorry it went a little long, but I can't, after 30-something years, I can't do a short talk about this stuff. Just can't. So, yeah. So, but it was a plum job, I'll say that much, you know. So, anyway, thanks for, yeah.
Did you leave that other post in there? You didn't do any testing on that?
Oh, no, the other one, we did take that out. And again, that's in with everything else. And I think I had intended to try and send it off for a carbon date, and I think I got sidetracked or whatever. You know, dealing with a site like this is really, your mind's just overwhelmed sometimes. But like I said, I made sure that we absolutely kept everything. You know, so every bit that's ever been collected from that, we have it and we know what it is. It's all perfectly labeled. I got all the stuff that Beta Analytic didn't do. They returned me all the unused samples, so I still have a lot of these single things and all. And no, they're at the station. Again, we have a full building there. We have a research station and museum there, you know, and half of the building is our laboratory, and we have big metal cases for stuff that's really important that we can lock and all that, and they're also fireproof, you know, in case the building ever burnt down. But you know, I'm pretty convinced that at some point, it may not be in Arkansas, of course, but we're probably going to find a buried Spaniard somewhere. You know, he's not going to be wearing armor or anything like that. That's the issue. But, you know, that's why people really, you just wonder if maybe some illicit digging hasn't dug up some of these things in the past, you know. By the time they got there, at least half of the people, I think almost half of them had died, you know, on the way. And, you know, the thing that was so bizarre about it to the Spaniards, though, was being welcomed into the town. That was so very different from elsewhere. And in fact, the accounts say that when they first got there, Casqui brought out an entourage of which he was the leader. And this was a thing they would do as a greeting ceremony anyway. Coming out bearing food and other types of things for them. And it even invited them to stay inside the town. And this is just after they had been attacked at Chicasa. They said, I don't think so. And they said they camped in a grove of trees half a league outside the town. And we can't tell exactly where that is. mainly because the whole area is in agriculture now, so we can't tell what might have been a grove of trees back then. But the weird thing is it's right by the junction of two rivers, and they don't talk about having camping on the other side of one of those rivers. So again, as the technology advances, somebody may be able to find that someday. But anyway, that's it. Yeah.
You ever find residue in those head pots?
It hasn't been done, but it's been talked about. The guy who wrote that book I talked about, he had the wherewithal to be able to do that, and he also knew all the owners of them, and he talked about doing it, but I don't think he ever got around to it. But you know, the inside of that one that we excavated, that still got original residue and stuff in it, because it's awful hard to clean out a pot like that without breaking it or something. And I sure didn't want to do that because it's the centerpiece of one of our exhibits there. You know. Thank y'all for coming. Don't freeze.
I just want to point out real quick that we have chip